Okay.
Sustainable Urban Network.
Hi, I'm Sonja Robinson. Tune in to Sun, Sustainable Urban Network, where we all shine together. The guests are hot, and the topics make the mic drop.
Sun back to new chapter. Now, not after. Clean energy matters. Fossil fuel not flatter. Rooftop solar in the mix is really good for the streets. Electricity needs a big rate relief. We gon' keep it pushing, everything on the sun. Watch the show, we gonna have some fun. Walk the talk if you official, proceed to run. 2020, inequity, way to turn. Sustainable Urban Network. Justice is on earth. Sustainable Urban Network. Justice is on earth. Fight for.
All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us on this Sun Saturday. Happy Sun Saturday. You could be anywhere. We appreciate you tuning in. You know what we do here on Sun Sustainable Urban Network. We try to provide information from our collective community that we believe that can make a difference in your life. We believe that our neighborhoods matter and our BIPOC communities matter. And so right now we want to talk about sustainability. We're going to talk about climate and our community planning here throughout the county of San Diego. Together, we believe that when we come together as a community wholly, that we have the opportunity to improve the quality of everyone's lives. And we want to engage on these topics to address racial, social, economic justice, and equity through the lens of environmental and climate justice. So for the positive impact of information from my guests today, we believe together we can scale up our neighborhoods. Before we dive into what's happening, any latest information, I also want to take a moment of silence for the unfortunate passing of those at Robb Elementary in Uvalde, Texas, as well as those that died senselessly in Buffalo, New York. We definitely want to take a moment, 21 seconds of silence, just to commemorate their lives. Thank you. Thank you. So now in all of our shows, what we do is we provide what we call the Sun Enlightenment. Our Sun Enlightenments are inspired by a modern thought teacher, Don Miguel Ruiz. And our Sun Enlightenments go as follows. 1, be responsible with your resources. 2, take the state of our racial, social, and climate justice seriously. 3, don't wait for others, do your part. And 4, when you do it from a really loving space. So what are the latest and what's happening? Did you guys hear last week what we had was the World Conference of Mayors, and our one and truly queen, Mother Kathleen Harmon, helped put together this wonderful, fantastic event. We had galas, they had mayors and elected officials and regular common people there too, but it was a wonderful event. We had an interfaith prayer on Wednesday and Thursday, a gala on Friday. And so I really want to highlight the work that she's doing in general, and definitely want to go ahead and give her what I would call the Sunshine Award for this week for the work that she's doing. And I also want to commemorate, as I did last week, also for President Biden and passing that executive order for police reform. And so he also gets the Sunshine Award. And without saying, the false shade goes to those gunmen, you know, both Salvador Ramos, as well as the other one in Buffalo, New York, for, again, those senseless domestic terrorist actions. Now, what else took place this last week? Oh, yeah, my son, our creative director, he performed in LA at 7-7 Lounge. It was a wonderful event, great performance by him. So must salute him on that. Now, there's one quote that I do want to provide, and that is by Marshall McLuhan. And the quote states as such: "There are no passengers on spaceship Earth. We are all crew." So I love that, because here together I have some of my friends, those that are in the community working on issues dealing with climate justice. And our topic here is climate and community planning. We have both Tommy Howe and Cody Peterson. They are both prior presidents of our Environmental Action Club here in the county of San Diego. I'm going to start off with Tommy Howe. I'm going to ask him to introduce himself, and then I'm going to ask Cody to introduce himself. And we got a lot of things we're going to talk about, y'all.
Well, thank you, Sonja. I appreciate it. It's great to see you. Great to hear about your son's recent appearance. And I want to thank you for all the great work you've been doing on climate-related matters over the last couple of years. You have really been in the forefront in a lot of different spaces. So thank you, Sonja, for the work you've been doing.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my name is Tommy Howe. I'm currently running for San Diego City Council in District 6. I'm also a county planning commissioner for the county of San Diego. And as Sonja indicated, I was one of the presidents of San Diego County Democrats for Environmental Action when I founded that back, or rather I co-founded that back in 2014. Cody came after a couple of years later and did a great job as well. And I've worked in a number of environmental spaces over the last couple of years, most notably as really helping to manage the Rewild Mission Bay campaign through the San Diego Audubon Society. I used to manage communications for the Surfrider chapter here in San Diego County, and I was briefly working in Oregon 10 years ago, managing communications for a wilderness advocacy organization called Oregon Wild. And another credit to President Biden, who really put forward some very positive forest policy last week as well about preserving old growth forests, which I was very happy to see too. So, you know, it's not just the moon of Endor, folks. Those places are actually here on Earth, and we want to preserve those. But I've also been involved in political spaces over the last a dozen years or so as well. And many people know me in San Diego for my time on the air. I was the morning host at 91X. I was also on at KPRI, and I was on at FM 94.9 for 10 years, which is like an ice age in this business. And used to host an environmental affairs show called Tree Huggers International, where I actually first met a lot of the folks who are on leading environmental matters here in San Diego today.
Great. Thank you for sharing some of your background. And I also want to introduce a friend, a community advocate, Dr. Cody Peterson, a bro.
Thank you, Sonja. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Dr. Cody Peterson. I'm not a medical doctor, so I'm a doctor of anthropology. So if anybody's injured, do not call me. I'm a lifelong San Diegan, native to San Diego, and I am a senior advisor for land use, education, and environment, supervisor law streamer. But before that, as Tommy mentioned, I was president of the San Diego County Democrats for Environmental Action and an executive committee member of San Diego Sierra Club. And I sit on the San Diego River Conservancy as well, and I'm on the board of San Diego International Sister Cities Association. So we do a lot of international stuff, and so at the county, I work on land use issues, and we'll probably get into some of those. So we work on zoning and land use and general plan updates. And we also have recently, we're in the process of implementing a regional decarbonization framework, which is really way out ahead of our counterparts throughout the country. We're working on a climate action plan. We've got sustainability plans for all departments that we're working on. We've got a sustainability reorganization for an Office of Sustainability and Environmental Justice. So we're really, Supervisor Lostrom has come on board, and we've really accelerated dramatically the climate and environmental commitment of the county. And so that's really been a pleasure. And it's also happy to be running for school board here in San Diego, and which is, as Tommy alluded to, it's a pretty exhausting process, but it's a pleasure to be here and talking about environment tonight. I can't wait to get started.
Yes. So, I mean, your background, both of you guys are just really been deep in the weeds as well as a broad spectrum, excuse me, of the work that you're doing, which I really appreciate and respect. And I appreciate because even mentioning our natural resources and the backcountry. You know, I also work with Protect Our Communities Foundation, right? And so we work to help protect our backcountry as well as our communities. So we both got to consider all living things, right? You know, our communities, our human beings, as well as our nature and the living out there too. So I appreciate that both you guys alluded to that type of experience and background as well. So let's kind of dive into some of this information when it deals with like SANDAG, our regional decarbonization framework. I mean, that's so deep. So I know that could, you know, use a totally its own show, and it probably will. But when we're looking at like sprawl, can you kind of give us a big picture, Cody, on how our politics really impact our environment, our climate, and things of that nature?
Yeah, well, Tommy and I worked together for a number of years at EnviroDims on fighting sprawl projects. At the county now, we can kind of take a holistic view of that. And so right out of the gate, we kind of put a stop to we really have had no, part of this is because of litigation, part of it's because developers realize that the climate's changed at the board. So we really have had no substantial sprawl projects approved in the time that we've been there. And that's been stalled for various reasons. And we can kind of get into some of the legislation, like SB 743, which is really, which is your VMT bill, which shifts zoning or shifts CEQA analysis away from level of service to and toward vehicle miles traveled, or basically ultimately the GHG intensity of particular kinds of growth. So what we've done really—
Real quick, Cody, because some of our listeners may not be familiar with some of these terminologies.
Oh, sorry.
Right?
Yes, I'm very bad about
I know
that.
that's our world and our language. Can you kind of just break that down just a little bit more?
So, yeah, you'll hear some of this terminology. VMT is very common now. It means vehicle miles traveled. It's a way of calculating the amount of additional vehicle miles that a particular project will generate on a daily basis. And so it is a proxy for greenhouse gas emissions or GHG emissions, because most of those miles are generated either through an internal combustion engine with its emissions, or frankly, because SDG is now in the mid-30s in terms of renewable, and most EVs are being charged at night when it's pretty much exclusively, except for some battery power, it's almost exclusively gas plants, gas baseload plants. So, you know, even your EVs are ultimately being charged right now predominantly by fossil fuels. So
I didn't think about that. When I was plugging up my car, I did not think about that. Interesting. Okay, thank you for letting me know.
And I mean, ideally, and then we can get into this later. I mean, ideally, we'll move to a paradigm in which people are charging their cars in the day at work, and that way you're charging when it's almost exclusively renewable energy, predominantly solar. And then actually, once we have bi-directional batteries, you'll be able to take your car, you'll charge it at work from solar, drive it home, plug it in, and you'll be able to run your appliances off your car battery. So that'll be a very exciting transition. And there's a lot of folks like
Bill Powers,
Bill Powers, Siegel. I mean, there's people who are very amped about bi-directional batteries. So, but anyhow, what I would say is we're shifting to a paradigm and trying to think deeply at the county, and I staff supervisor at SANDAG and San Diego Community Power. We're trying to think deeply about where we want development to take place. And we're talking to developers and community members, and it's not about saying, no, there's not going to be development. We do need probably 200,000 additional housing units over the next 10 years. And we're going to have to build that housing both for sheer supply, and we're going to have to build affordable in there. And if we don't, this housing crisis will increase. So we're trying to identify—
How many did you say we need?
Well, I mean, our target's about 200,000 additional units. We're so far behind.
200,000. So when you hear people saying, oh, this project is going to have 200 projects, that is like a drop in a bucket for the massive need. And this 200,000, does that cover the entire county?
All of the region, which is the whole county. Yeah. So we're not going to be able to
hit that. I just wanted our listeners to really
take it in.
Yes.
We're so far behind. And part of that, our housing crisis is about supply. And part of it, and Tommy can probably get into this as well at a more granular level in terms of the neighborhoods, part of it's sheer supply. We're short on supply, period. But within the supply, the private sector is currently unable to produce housing and unwilling. It's unable and unwilling to produce housing that is affordable to the bottom 60% of San Diegans. So 120% area median income and below, they cannot build that. They will need public subsidy or some other form of subsidy from the government land, or they'll need some form of subsidy or low-income housing tax credits. They cannot produce housing that is affordable to the bottom 60% of this
Why?
county.
Okay, so can you break that down for us as much to the extent that you can?
I can, but Tommy may want to talk a little bit about it.
Yeah. Oh, Tommy, break it down for us.
Well, as Cody said, it's not necessarily that we have a housing crisis so much. It's simply a housing affordability crisis. We are building housing, but so much of that is simply out of reach for people who actually work for a living. And in my neighborhood and the areas that I'm seeking to represent as part of my campaign, that's been a real crisis because we have kids, we have grandkids in these communities. They want to stay near family. They want to stay in the neighborhoods that they grew up. They want to stay near jobs. And unfortunately, they're not able to do that. And I can't tell you how discouraging it is to go door to door and speak with so many neighbors again and again and say that, the grandma and grandpa or mom and dad have a house, but the kids simply are unable to stay. And it makes more sense for them to go and leave and go to another state. So on one hand, we can't be losing our workforce that actually works for a living. And on the other side of the coin, we can't be bringing in folks exclusively who maybe are not necessarily from the community or from the area to go, but who can afford that housing that's actually being purchased. As Cody indicated, developers, it's very difficult for developers to really build anything that would truly be affordable because it is so expensive to build here in Southern California as it is. Now, on one hand, and Cody indicated this, we've gotten to a place right now, at least where we're not pursuing building sprawl housing. But even if we are building sprawl in the hinterlands, wherever that may wind up being, we're not doing it at the extent we were, say, 10, 15 years ago. But even so, that housing still wouldn't be in an affordable place. So on one hand, we do want to pursue goals regarding VMTs travel to reduce GHGs, greenhouse gas emissions. We want people to live closer to transit. We want people to live closer to their jobs. We want to cut down on the number of miles people have to drive to go to work. But at the same time, that also reduces the available area we could wind up building. But if we're still in the same paradigm where we're not able to build housing that most people can afford, we're not really going to get around to solving any of the problems, including the climate problem. And that's really the issues that a lot of folks who work for a living in my communities are facing right now.
So Tommy, as well as Cody, but I want to start with you, Tommy. Can you really give us some of the elements or the factors that are causing the developers' inability to actually build something that is affordable, such as like $500,000 or below, right? Can you, what is the most expensive element that creates this unaffordability for builders to build something that is affordable?
Well, I would say
I can talk about that, Tom. Or do you want to talk about it? Take your pick.
I would just say that. Thank you, Cody. I would just say that, for example, we've got the Three Roots project being built right now in Mira Mesa, and that's like $1.2 million for a shared wall. Now, people in other communities might scoff at that, but here in San Diego, that's actually basically the cost of living in this neighborhood. And in a way, what they're building is optimal because the Three Roots development is near all of those job centers. But what's causing that unaffordability is simply the cost of living, the cost of labor, the cost of construction, the cost of materials, and building it in Southern California. That itself has become, we've reached this kind of tipping point where it's become too expensive to do that. And as Dr. Peterson indicated, developer subsidized or government subsidized housing may be the answer. At the end of the day, you and I wind up paying for that. But if that means that we can find a basic, range where folks can purchase that's free potentially of having to compete with speculators and short-term vacation rentals and corporate housing, then we might be able to get to a place where we're truly providing housing for our neighbors who actually need it, who want to stay and raise families and stay for 30 years in our community. But I'll cede the rest of that to Cody.
I'll just talk very in very specific ways about the factors that go into that price. So you start out, land value is itself rising. Land value is ultimately a function of surrounding amenities value. COVID's actually the pandemic dramatically increased home values in San Diego, in part as people adopted remote lifestyle, remote work, and they realized they could live in beautiful San Diego and work here. So we've seen a lot of appreciation value associated with that. But this is typical of urban. So there's a return on, there is a value in having access to great jobs. This is a real job center of biotech. We've got a really burgeoning tech and biotech sector. They're hungry for workers. It's also a major factor in driving the value. That is an amenity, being close to a job, being close to an ocean, being in a good school district. These are all natural, private, and public amenities that increase the value of land. So number one, you have very expensive land. Number two, materials right now, especially with the supply chain issues that have come up with COVID, but they were expensive beforehand.
Thank you, because I was going to say a lot of what you're saying, I'm not totally buying it. And again, I'm just, and the reason why I know what you're saying is accurate, but I'm not fully buying it because this was an issue. We were talking about this issue before COVID came here in this county, right? And I understand location. I get that when it comes to real estate. I understand location has a lot to do with the amount. But I think that in itself is appealing, but the materials and things like that cost shift just really took place since 2020. But what was the reason prior to that, right?
They were already climbing before that. Materials costs, cement costs, steel, cement. Right. And so I'll go through the factors and I'll say how they're being affected by what's happening in planning. You have materials, you have the cost of labor. People have to live here. And even if they live far away, they have to commute. And the cost of transportation often offsets the benefits you get from having cheaper housing in the rural communities. So you don't actually end up winning because working families now have to spend time and money in transporting themselves and their families to work or to amenities. So then you have the cost of money. You have to go out and get capital for planning. You have to get it for construction. You have to get it for land acquisition. So now you have a cost of capital because you have to go find that somewhere and you have to pay a rate of return. So there's a lot of complexities to it, but those are your main costs that you have to wrestle with. One of the challenges as we shift away from a paradigm of sprawl development in which you can do very basic with semi-skilled labor, you can build a 2-story, what we call stick built, which is 2x4 construction. It's fairly cheap. Back in the old days, you had flat mesa land, so you didn't have to do very much grading or grade and fill. Now, even if you did sprawl, you'd be moving out into the foothills and you have to do a lot of terrain work in order to do it. And that raises the cost $50,000, $70,000 a unit. So anyhow, as you bring that construction in, it dramatically increases the cost of all those factors because now the limit, you tend to see a lot of what's called Texas wraps. You see a lot of Mira Mesa. A Texas wrap is a style of building houses that was developed in Texas, or it became popularized in Texas. And it is it's called a 5/2 or a 4/2. So what you do is you have your limit of stick built by building code is 5 stories. But you want to get a little bit more on it. So then you can put 1 story of cement or 2 stories of cement, steel reinforced cement. So you have a 5/2, which is why you see all over Mira Mesa, you see these structures in Mira Mesa, and then you wrap the parking.
So what do you mean by 5/2? Because I'm not really understanding that. And I don't know if my listeners really will understand what 5/2.
So 5/2 is an attempt by developers to maximize the return on investment by they're trying to get as much, quote, stick built, which is the 2x4s. You see that classic building. The limit on that is 5 stories by building code. So they're trying to get cheap 5 stories doing stick built because you can do that with basically semi-skilled labor. You come in, I mean, there's a lot of complexities.
So you're saying like a multi-family unit? It's what you're
talking about? Yeah, you're talking about multi-family units.
Okay,
and then they put 1 story to get a little bit more. You put retail in the bottom, 1 story of concrete.
Mixed use.
So you're trying to get up to 6 or 7 by doing the 5 stick built over 2 concrete. Now, that is the cheapest way they've found to build up. But if we really wanted transit supportive housing, we wanted to get rid of the cars and those housing structures then wrap around the parking. That's why it's a Texas wrap. And what we would really have to get up to 8 stories and above. Now you have steel construction, you have concrete construction, very expensive, very complicated labor. Now you're talking about organized labor, skilled, trained workforce, complicated building projects, complicated timelines, very capital intensive. But that's the kind of construction we need. We don't need a bunch of 3-story buildings for our climate action. We actually need people to live in high rises around transit. So as we get more and more climate responsive, it gets more and more expensive to build the housing we need.
So I hear what you're saying, although our affordability, as you know, I'm sure that both of you guys may already be aware of this. So in 2014, and that's when you became president, Tommy, of the Environmental Action Club here in the county. In 2014, San Diego, the city of San Diego, was the second least affordable place to live in the country, second behind San Francisco. And then in 2017, we were the least affordable place to live in the country. So this is New York, San Francisco, all Chicago, all the major areas. And now we are again the least affordable place to live in the country. So I say that for many reasons. And so that from affordability, you mentioned skilled workers. I'm all for, paying the prevailing wages for skilled workers. The issue that I see in San Diego, that the wages don't oftentimes match in the same range from a cost of living that it does in San Francisco and Chicago and New York and other places, right? The rates are oftentimes a lot lower than you find doing the same job in a different major metropolitan city. And so I also believe from a part of the solution has to do with, when we look at affordability, is also having to look at our wages, right? So if people are paid, such as in San Francisco, the housing is oftentimes more, but because they're getting paid significantly more, right, that their affordability, now they're not number one, we are, right? So affordability doesn't mean the most expensive, right?
That's
so we
correct.
know there's
relative to income.
Right.
That's correct.
Right. So I hear what you're saying, and I appreciate, and I know my listeners are appreciating you breaking it down with the 5/4, because I didn't know what a 5/4 was, right? So I'm just going to keep it real. What is 5/4, right? And I wasn't even picturing that we were talking about a multi-unit, housing, which it makes sense that we would be. But I also believe that why are many other metropolitan cities and areas able to provide more affordable housing units? You mentioned Texas. Let's use San Antonio, right? Or we can use any other city. So you talked about the Texas, what do you call it? Texas round?
Texas wrap, yeah.
Texas wrap, that's what it is. So I'm thinking of, Texas Hold'em, but anyway. So, but why is it that the same, and maybe Tommy, you can help us understand this too. Why is it the same unit would cost significantly more here in San Diego than it would, let's say, in San Antonio, Texas?
You want to move to San Antonio?
I'm just using that as an example.
No, but I mean that seriously. Do you want to move to San Antonio?
Cody, I'm not sure how to answer that question.
No, but because part of the answer is that ultimately the market is driving the price that people are willing to pay for it, for access to the amenities, and people want to move to California. That's part of what's ultimately, it is a market rate of what people are willing and able to spend for that housing.
I mean, so I can't
go to Peoria. Go to Peoria. The housing's dirt cheap. The salaries suck too, but the housing's cheap in Peoria,
Well, the funny thing about 2 years of COVID is that people have really figured out, and I think a lot of employers have figured out, including employers here in San Diego. And one benefit that's come out from all of this is that some employers have realized, oh, you know what? Productivity largely stays the same if I've got employees who are happy, who are working from home, who can take their kids to soccer practice and go and pick them up at school. They like that, and they can go and walk the dog, and it hasn't really affected their, it puts the entire world on Zoom. There are some benefits to that. There's some drawbacks from that, but a lot of these jobs facilitate that. And as a result, people are able to decide, you know what, maybe I will live in San Antonio, maybe I will live in Peoria, because the cost of living is so much less there, and because it costs less to potentially build a home there or build a structure, I can move there with my California salary. And that's not a bad way to go. And so now, of course, how you handle the schools and other issues there, or the lack of the natural amenities, that's a very, very different thing. But people are able to make that decision now. And I think that's probably a positive thing. But, we still have a lot of people coming to San Diego, specifically for a lot of these jobs, including a lot of
we do, but we also lost a lot of people. I mean, so now that we're talking on this, let's bring up the census, right? We lost a significant amount of people in our region, in our county, to the point that we lost, I believe, a senator, and I want to say we lost an assembly seat. I do know we lost, so again, or was it a congressional seat?
Congressional, congressional is relative to the rest of the country, yeah.
Right. It was the congressional. So obviously what this equation that has been something existing for a while, people are determining, making that decision that Cody said, do you want to, move to San Antonio? And people said yes to moving to San Antonio, right? So because our census reduced our population, not our census, but based on our census, our population actually decreased versus increase. So that's something else.
But Sonja, so this is part of the paradox of growth in San Diego. It's part of why California has the highest poverty rate in the country, driven in large part by the cost of housing.
Can you repeat that? That is very important, and I want others to hear that.
California has the highest poverty rate in the country, and it is driven in large part by the cost of housing. And what's happening is, as Tommy pointed out, there are lots of great jobs in tech and biotech. But those tech and biotech jobs, for every one, quote, actual frontline tech and biotech jobs, there's 4 or 5 service jobs associated with it. So you're bringing in these people with very high salaries. I staff Sandag, and we are losing our modelers to all these other, to Qualcomm, because a modeler can make half a million dollars a year. So they're sucking very high income jobs. They're attracting people, but working people they're still seeing these same low service wages, and they're looking at those wages and saying, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to move to Arizona, because yes, there's a service job, but I'd have to live now they're being displaced. If you talk about displacement and equity, when I was young, Logan Heights, there was an African-American community in Logan Heights, like South San Diego, East San Diego. They have slowly been displaced. Now you look at Spring Valley and Rancho San Diego, that African-American community has been continuously displaced. And that's what's happening to working people, is they're saying, yeah, there's a great service job up there in the Golden Triangle or on the 56 corridor, but I'd have to live so far away, and I still wouldn't be able to, because even in Chula Vista, housing is expensive. It's not like in the old days where you're like, I'll just live in National City and commute. No, you can't even afford National City anymore. Sorry, but that's what's happening.
No, this is a very important topic. And we're going to have our sidebar conversations, because I also just believe what took place, even with all those stimulus checks, but if you're going to turn around and raise all the prices on everybody, it's like, I'd rather you kept that stimulus check, right? If I want to keep it 100 and keep the rates on it and all the products, where it was, right? But that's a totally different topic. I have to bring you guys back for that one. Okay, so next on our topic that we really want to make sure that we discuss is, Tommy, I want you to have the floor and talk about what's happening as a community planning commissioner, right?
Oh, well, I was appointed by Supervisor Lawson Reamer to serve as our District 3 planning commissioner. And typically what we look at are generally development that is occurring in unincorporated areas of the county. So, this could be Borrego Springs, it could be Mount Laguna, but typically it's been areas that are near the city and near urbanized areas and near jobs where growth is occurring. And it's about, how do you define a village? How do you manage that kind of growth? Places like Valley Center and Ramona, and places that city dwellers may typically think of as being rather rural, but slowly they're seeing the need for additional housing there as well. A lot of that's being driven by Sacramento. So, but the positive thing is that I do think that the Planning Commission is taking into account the concerns of a lot of local communities, and I think they're doing that in conjunction with the understanding that we are changing the way we approach the environment. I think there's an understanding that that the VMT dynamic is critical, and that it has an effect on the county. And in a lot of ways, I think San Diego is leading, has the opportunity to lead in a greater way. You know, you look at what's happening right now in Riverside County, and in my opinion, it's not something that we want to be replicating here in San Diego County. And in some ways, the planning commission at the county, as advisory as it is sort of the first line of defense on that. And at least we're able to give some guidance to the San Diego Board of Supervisors. But generally, it involves other things like licensing and.
So real quick, Tommy, you mentioned that what happened in Riverside County is something that you don't want to see replicated in San Diego. Can you give me, as well as our listeners, an idea of what you mean? Like, what is it that you don't like about Riverside County that you do not want to see replicated in San Diego County?
Riverside County is a lovely place, and I have a lot of friends there, and it's a great place. But
the disclaimer, I love the disclaimer.
Yeah, that's the politician in me. But I will tell you, there is an area to the east of the 215, between the 215 and Hemet, which when you drive along these roads, the amount of sprawl being built there is shocking. And the signs that are there, they're not municipal signs, they're developer signs. And they're putting up all kinds of single family homes. And of course, that's an American dream. I have a number of my friends who moved to Temecula over the years because they had a family, they wanted to have a larger home, and they weren't necessarily commuting to San Diego every single day. But you would be astonished at the volume of homes that are being built in these valleys. That just go on and on and on. And it really compounds the problem that I think we in San Diego are at least trying to address by encouraging development that is closer to jobs, closer to transit, even as we struggle to go and build that infrastructure. And really in Riverside County, you're seeing kind of the inverse occurring, and you're having these much lengthier drives. And if you're not driving to San Diego from Hemet, you're probably driving to Los Angeles, which is even further away.
So I got to propose a question. I appreciate you sharing and breaking it down to us and letting us know exactly what you meant. So here's an issue that I've been wrestling with, right? And I want to hear you guys' thoughts on this. And that is when we say we want housing built near transit. I'm not saying that theory is completely wrong, but I do think without having that transit be totally electric, there is now just perpetuating the redlining, the asthma, the poor air quality, the pollution that communities that would want and need to live near there again, right? So I just feel like we have to, have definitely a broad solution to make sure that if I live near transit, that doesn't mean that is very similar to the redlining, right? Where the highways are located and where the air quality is poor in those areas, and those areas represent more like BIPOC communities, right? So if that transit, especially massive transit, is not electrified, then building near there and having people live there is just perpetuating the problem and issues we currently have.
Yeah, Sonja, and I wouldn't suggest that building near transit would not be inherently electric. I mean, obviously, not obviously, but I would say that we're certainly speaking about light rail or trolleys or something to that effect. I'll give you an example of this. 25 years ago, I was living in Seattle, and at the time in Seattle, there was a lot of interest to build what became the Sound transit system, a light rail system throughout the Puget Sound area. Now today, that's really held up as a really good example of public works done very, very well. The people in the community certainly wanted it. The traffic merited investing in that. The traffic was so bad there in that part of the country. But ultimately, that was, much of it was electrified. And now where those communities have had those Sound transit areas go through them, they have been, yes, they've probably been gentrified to some extent, but I would argue they've been rather positively affected to the benefit of the area. Now, locally, I would say, like, for example, here in Mira Mesa, we're not going to get the trolley anytime soon. but we do need to do an investment into electric buses. I think that's critical. And we have corridors here in the area where, the only transit we're going to have is going to be some kind of bus service. So I would certainly want to see that development being built, not only along transit corridors, but yes, electrified. And there's no reason why those shouldn't be some of the most desirable areas to go and purchase. I certainly think that they would be, and that certainly turned out to be the case in Seattle.
Thank you for giving us a case study example there. I know Denver is also a city that normally ranks #1 or in the top 3 for their transportation. Cody, give us your thoughts on that, or you can pivot to whatever else.
Yeah, I mean, I would affirm Tommy's position that #1, in the near future, we'll have electrified. All your new lines are going to be electrified. The purple line, and that's all going to be electrified. So that'll be moot. But even now, I mean, if there's low uptake, then you'll have road traffic and transit traffic, and potentially there is still obviously fossil fuel being consumed by rail. But if you actually are having people get out of their cars and into rail, you're even though you have a gas-powered vehicle or engine on it, it's still dramatically reducing your greenhouse gas emissions and your pollutants. But that will be moot within the next 10 years. We'll electrify all that. But I would say to Tommy's point, the real risk in these transit stops is not that there's going to be environmental health consequences. It's going to gentrify. It's going to push out. It is a high quality transit stop is such a valuable amenity. It raises the value of surrounding property so dramatically, and you're going to have upzoning associated with all of these. So you're going to shift, single story, 35-foot limit residential, single family home. The second you get a transit stop in there, you either prior to the building of the transit stop or soon after, you're going to do an upzoning and upzone it all to high rise. The perfect example of this is
I know, Cody, can you give our listeners a definition of what upzoning means? And that would help.
Well, by upzoning, we mean increasing the unit capacity of that parcel. So instead of having, 5 units to the acre, you're going to go to 30 plus units to the acre. You're going to go even higher than that. So that's pretty, very rarely does a municipality either before or soon after not recognize that putting a transit stop in is inherently going to raise the amenities value to the degree that there's going to be that it's unwise to keep the old zoning. So then they upzone and they add capacity. Now that could be raising the height limit. It could be decreasing the setbacks from the roads. It could be increasing the floor area ratio or the amount of floor that you can build relative to the underlying land parcel. All kinds of ways to upzone a parcel, but it basically means you're increasing the unit capacity of that parcel. So again, and when that happens, you're then going, let's say UTC is the perfect example of this. UTC, when I was brought home from University Hospital to Mesa Grad Student Apartments, it was frogs and lizards and coyotes and mountain lions. And that's before, UTC had just gone in or whatever. It was just like open country. Now, then you went through a phase of townhomes, and they built the townhomes in the mid 70s. And there was freeways. There's the 805 around there and access to the 5. And that was then townhomes. And then you had some high-rise commercial going in as the Golden Triangle developed up there. And then once you had the redevelopment UTC and and now the blue line, look at it now. I cannot even recognize it. And I was born there, like raised, brought home there. In a way, it's a beautiful thing. You don't want to take single family like South UC, and Tommy, I think, should speak to this. South UC is not transit supportive. It's dense single family. It is like very small scale strip malls. To dump in huge density into there would not, to my mind, would not be ideal. And the community would definitely fight it. But to put density around UTC, where you've got great amenities nearby, you've got good schools, you've got great transit, you've got great commercial amenities, you can go shopping, you're one exit away from the beach. It's just a great spot to put density in, provided you have additional benefits, community benefits like park space and good bus stops and good sidewalks to walk on. Provided you have all that, that's a great place to put density, frankly. So, you know, and Tommy can maybe speak to that dichotomy of, to get beyond this NIMBY, YIMBY, to get beyond YIMBY, NIMBY, this not in my backyard, yes in my backyard. The question is not like takes great less filling. It is, what are the criteria that make us say yes or no, and whether a particular development does that? So I think Tommy would probably say, North UC, where you have that great transit amenity and great shopping amenities, let's get the density. But South UC, you want to talk a little bit about that, Tommy, and how that unfolded with the recent community plan?
Yeah, there was a proposal by the city to basically rezone about 1/3 to 1/4 of the residential areas of South University City. Those are the areas that are south of Rose Canyon for multifamily units. Now, the area is already rather built out with single family homes. And the change was essentially predicated on the idea that because Governor Drive is essentially a bus route for the 50 bus, which I don't even think runs on weekends, it just runs on weekdays, that in itself was inherently a transit corridor as vital as the transit corridor that was created in North UC, i.e. UTC, with the arrival of the Blue Line. And so it just seemed as though that you were going to really rewire an entire community to add 100, 150 units, none of which would do anything to certainly lower the cost of housing. It would not put you anywhere near certainly any electrified or effective transit for some time. Plus, on top of that, Governor Drive is really the only east-west route in and out of South University City. So there were a lot of counterintuitive reasons to do that. And on top of that, the Blue Line doesn't even have a stop in South University City. So it seemed as though there might have been other reasons for why that area was considered. And I have some thoughts about why that might have been the case. But regardless, you know, there's a reason why the Blue Line went into UTC in North University City. And it wasn't just the proximity to UCSD, it was also the proximity to that University City community plan, which is being considered right now. The great lion's share of that rezoning and upzoning, as Cody was speaking about, was in UTC. The catch, though, is you got to make sure that when you're doing that, that you're not upzoning an area that is already affordable housing. And I have seen some examples of that in UTC, and we got to watch that. I mean, there's an apartment building at Nobel and Regents where I think a one bedroom is about $2,100, which is pretty darn affordable, as crazy as it may sound to others outside of the community, but that's pretty affordable for that area in this part of San Diego.
What is affordable? Tell me, what's
well, that's a subjective thing, but I gave the example of $2,100 a month, which for rent, and certainly in that area, is considerably affordable.
You're right about that.
Believe me, it was nothing like what I paid for my first apartment in Bankers Hill 20 years ago. But regardless, you know, so we don't want to see those properties that are inherently affordable being replaced by steel and glass structures that are going to have rents that are $4,000 a month. And on top of that, there was pressure from UCSD. There's a concern and an argument that the school is not providing the volume of housing for its students that it should. And it's not, you know, how much of the city's responsibility is it to provide that? Reasonable people can disagree on that. I certainly had my concerns about that. But, you know, and I want to pivot real quickly too, but, you know, also related to upzoning, you know, Cody had mentioned the Purple Line, which will eventually get into Kearny Mesa from the South Bay. And, you know, the Convoy area was going to be affected by the new Kearny Mesa community plan update. Good opportunities to do densification around transit, near job centers, near transportation routes. But we have to make sure, again, that we're not gentrifying out a lot of these small businesses and a lot of these restaurants that really became the backbone of the Convoy community because they were able to get in there because that was initially zoned as like a warehouse district. And now it's become its own kind of cool cultural thing on its own with restaurants and places to eat. I mean, right away, that area just has to be made more safe and more effective and more fun just to go walk around or bicycle around. That's a place where we could really go and retrofit a very hard-edged urban area to make it more palatable for people to entertain themselves and move about.
Thank you for breaking it down. You guys, we don't have that much more time, but I love the fact that you pivot, Tommy, to the things you wanted to make sure we hear and what we know. I also want to give Cody an opportunity. We have a few minutes, but I want to give you guys an opportunity to express the things that you're passionate about, things that you believe that would help benefit our communities, our BIPOC communities, our collective communities, right? How can we improve the lifestyle and the quality of life here in San Diego? Cody.
I just want to put a finer note on something we alluded to early on, which is this inability of the housing industry to produce housing that's affordable to the bottom 60%. Mm-hmm. So if you look at our RENA numbers, which are the numbers that the state gives us,
what is the RENA?
Residential Housing Needs Assessment. The state gives it to SANDAG, which is San Diego Association of Governments, which then distributes it to other jurisdictions. The county gets its allotment, and everybody is supposed to hit those targets. And then every 10 years, you do an assessment, you figure out whether you hit your targets. Many of the jurisdictions around our region are hitting their above moderate, which is, you have different categories, but moderate income is 80 to 120% of area median income. Above that is 120 and above. So many areas are hitting or exceeding their above moderate income. And mostly it's 150 and above, if you look at the numbers, if you break it down. A developer can make a profit building units, multifamily units that are 150% area median income and above. They can. Below that, they start having a lot of challenges. Now, what does that mean? It means that if we are going to solve our affordable housing crisis, first of all, supply and demand makes it very clear that you're never going to build your way out in market rate, because the second you started to build enough market rate units to soften the demand, that is, you glutted it, they would just stop building it. So you're never going to get it down that way. They'll literally just stop the second it starts glutting it. So that's not going to happen. If you want to build housing that is affordable to working families, the public as a whole is going to have to find ways of generating revenue, and it's going to have to invest. And here is where the problem with San Diego politics is fundamental. We are unable to talk about the need for revenue and to talk about how we're going to generate revenue. And if we are not talking about it, we are blowing sunshine, because the only group you can cross subsidize with inclusionary, which is good. We need some inclusionary. Inclusionary means you force developers to build, let's say 10, 15% of their units have to be affordable. But they're just going to cross subsidize that by charging more for the market rate units. So in the end, yeah, you do it, but overall, it doesn't really help you, and it makes it harder for the project to pencil. So you kill particular kinds of projects, and you only do high profit projects where the developer can afford to cross subsidize that way. What we need to do is invest as a public in building affordable housing. That's what we have to do. And the private sector is not going to help us. And unless we're honest with our constituents and tell them, you have been doing very, very well. Your real estate appreciated 30% over the last 2 years. We're going to have a parcel tax, or we're going to have a real estate transfer tax. Unless there's some way of addressing our dramatic and increasing wealth and income inequality, and having the public pony up, those who can pony up a small portion of their income or their capital gains in order to subsidize the construction of affordable housing, we are not going to get it. We have to be honest about that.
Wow. I really appreciate you bringing that point blank and to the point, as well as providing another solution to address a major problem. And this is the thing, I love one of the quotes by Dr. Martin Luther King that I love so much, is that tolerance of injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, right? So it seemed like it's okay if this affects this community, but this thing is widespread, right? It's like our lack of affordability is a pandemic in itself in our county, right? Like it's spreading everywhere. So everyone is being affected at a certain level of income, as you mentioned it, the moderate working families or what have you, and from that definition. So I really appreciate you breaking that down, Cody. You make me like, we need to have a forum on this. So Tommy, also let us know what else is what else are you very passionate about? And then Cody, I'm going to come back to you too, because I know you are also, I don't know if you're technically a professor, but I know you're an educator and you teaching. So Tommy, what else are you very, very passionate about that you want us to hear, and ways you think that solutions can come to our city?
Well, I can talk about the environment all day and conservation, but let's stay on the track that we're on here, because this is a good discussion. And look, Cody's absolutely right. I mean, this does require a major public investment, and revenue has always been an issue with the city of San Diego, especially. I mean, revenue is, look at what we pay our employees compared to other communities and other municipalities. I mean, it is not imaginary. So revenue is always going to be there's going to be a big push pull on that. And I always joke that, as a candidate, you walk around with like this imaginary endless bag of money that enables you to talk about all these cool things that you want to do. And of course, you have to get a trajectory and talk about things that you want to be shooting for. That's part of being a leader. But I would just say that, the greenest building is the one that is already built. And so we have to look at repurposing structures that already exist. And sometimes we can repurpose those structures for things that maybe weren't initially intended, or we might find new ways to sort of apply a structure. We have, we're talking about UTC, UTC Mall earlier. Well, slowly but surely, a lot of brick and mortar stores are going away. There was a big Fry's store along the 15 that has been repurposed. I often talk about not just malls, but like warehouses and office parks, even areas that have seen declining vacancies since even before the pandemic began. If we can repurpose some of these buildings, and frankly, buildings are already built for people to go march around in, then I think that's actually a good opportunity there. And it's an opportunity to really do that potentially public or developer subsidized housing that we've sort of been talking about here and there throughout this program. But repurposing structures, I think, is certainly something that we should be looking at.
All right. So on that note, I'm going to say I'm definitely going to have you guys back. I appreciate the work that you guys are doing in our community. Thank you for joining us today on Sun Sustainable Urban Network. We appreciate the work you all are doing. And again, we'll see you guys soon. Thank you all.
Thank you, Sonja. Great seeing you. Thank you.
All right.